I'd rather have my team spending time with customers than internally. And so they should be able to get the information that they need asynchronously. And the one thing is probably the coaching. But again, there's technologies out there, whether it's the Gone, the courses, a million of them out there that enable you to provide those coaching moments. And that's what's really important for async, and documentation around, where customers stand in their journey, what their friction points are, what their objections are, whatever that is. So sales should 100% be able to be async. And, we're remote. I mean, InVision, we went from, almost nothing to 100 million in ARR in 5 years, right? There's some proof points, the GitLabs of the world, like it works. There's going to be a time and a place for team meetings and things like that, doing role plays, all of that stuff. But for the most part, technology has come so far that there's opportunities to sort of address and support the organization asynchronously, or even for sales teams. And I'd rather prioritize them spending times synchronously with their customers and the market and the community that they're involved in than would be internal.
Hey everyone, welcome to Leading From Afar, a show by remote leaders for remote leaders, where we dive into the most important topics facing leaders in the future of work. I'm your host, Scott Markovitz. I was the first hire at InVision, one of the first all-remote companies back in 2012. I've since helped build and scale multiple remote teams as an early employee or consultant. In each episode, we geek out doing deep dives on specific topics like within Async, hiring the best talent anywhere, how to create a fun and engaging environment remotely, and so much more. This show was created to help managers leading remotely upskill themselves to help them build world-class remote cultures. If you enjoy this content, please feel free to support me by subscribing in your favorite podcasting app, share it with friends and colleagues, and feel free to buy me a coffee via the show's website. Everybody, thank you for tuning in today to the show. I'm your host, Scott Markovitz. So for a long time, and even quite recently, I've heard from many sales leaders that sales teams just need to be in person. And really, if doing it remote, then they absolutely had to be working synchronously, getting the team together for synchronous calls often, to share news and opportunities, give high fives on closed deals, and similar. So today, I'm happy to be joined by a fellow remote OG and former colleague of mine at InVision, Ryan Burke. So Ryan heads up the sales team at an awesome async tool and company called Qatalog. In the episode today, we start off by discussing how the early sales team at InVision was actually mostly office-based, but how then he helped scale a sales team globally, obviously without offices. We then discuss how Qatalog is helping teams go async, and of course, what he's doing with his team to lead towards the path of the future of work for his sales team and all sales teams, which is, of course, working asynchronously. So if you're a sales leader that's thinking about async, or at least understands that it's the future of work, yes, even for sales teams, and want to know how to embrace it the right way, you're going to love this episode. Ryan, how you doing today? Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining.
Thanks, Scott. Good to see you.
Yeah, it's good to see you too. It's nice to kind of have a history here of the two former InVision OGs. So I think we'll get into the conversation, but it's great to finally be able to chat about some of the history of InVision and things that you've been working on. How's everything in Boston these days?
It's rainy, but everything is good. Everything is good. Working from home here in Charlestown.
Nice. The Patriots lost this weekend, so maybe not as good.
Patriots are going to have a tough year, unfortunately, but Celtics season is starting, so we've got something to look forward to.
Indeed. So usually the way we start off the show is just kind of doing a bit of an introduction of yourself. Sure. And in this case, maybe give us a little bit of the origin story of Qatalog.
So Qatalog, I joined Qatalog after 5.5 years at InVision, which I know we'll touch on. Qatalog is out to solve a lot of the issues that remote companies are feeling, and something that I felt pretty acutely at InVision in terms of information being siloed, teams working in different tools, having to search all over the place for different pieces of information. And so I was approached by Burke, the CEO founder, And basically Qatalog was his brainchild. He worked at Amazon and TransferWise, and he felt a lot of the pain points as well, where, knowledge was just scattered across an organization. And so what he wanted to do was, build and create kind of a single pane of glass view into everything that's happening across your business. So think about what people are working on, updates, documentation, communication. We give companies, one single place to search, and it does connect to all the tools that you're using, whether it's Notion or Salesforce or Asana. But again, it gives you that one place to go. And so we're super excited. We have a lot of momentum these days, a lot of folks signing up for the product. And it's exciting because different companies are using us for different use cases, but there's really an application for Qatalog across every part of an organization. And so it's a really exciting time to be a Qatalog.
No, absolutely. It's certainly at heart. I don't think maybe we'll touch on it a little bit later.
Yeah.
But as remote goes forward, obviously the future of remote is async, and the heart of async is the written word and long form writing. And as you noted, I obviously face the same in InVision. I faced similar working in other remote companies and consulting and coaching other remote companies. Each team has their own tools. Developers tend to like to use Confluence, support people like to use Zendesk, and other ones, business people, Google Docs and what have you. And just obviously keeping everything up to date, keeping everything in line, having this disjointed information where when you're one team and you need to find something that's relevant to another team, you may be looking at Google Docs where the right places like Confluence, and not having that. And we all speak about it, right? At InVision, we always spoke about, InVision, we wanted to be the central source of truth, right? For design. Everything wants to be the central source, and that's where it needs to be, especially as we move forward with the future work and the importance of writing documentation in the future. So kind of diving right into the conversation, and I believe your first foot into remote work was when you joined us at InVision, similar to my experience with remote. And I remember very early on speaking to a couple of people that were on your team, on the sales team. From what I believe, I remember they were physically all sitting in like a WeWork space or some kind of like office space together in Boston. And it was fascinating because in theory, like InVision was this remote company and we're supposed to be like, get anyone wherever they are. But then most or part of like the sales team, especially early on, was like face-to-face, in person, in some kind of space, maybe in Boston. So would kind of love to hear that origin story of how that started, like where the team was made up and kind of what the thinking was like to get people into a physical space together when I guess the whole idea of InVision remote was to be remote.
Yeah, no, it's an interesting question. So, this was back in 2014. So, before remote was a thing. And Clark Valberg, when he was, sort of recruiting me, was saying, hey, if you want to set up a sales team in person in Boston, go ahead. And because again, at the time there was a few,
there's only a handful of companies that
were doing remote, but everybody said sales teams can't be remote. You got to listen to other people's calls. You need to ring the bell and the high fives and all of that stuff. And so I was pretty skittish about coming on board to a fully remote environment. And, I did come on board. There were a few salespeople. I remember Ahad and, we had some folks that were remote, but I did hire some people in Boston. And, at first I was going to build an office. And so I had, commercial real estate people. We were doing office tours. And then I was like, you know what? I don't want to build something that's counter to the overall culture. And then I started to hire strategically into some other markets where maybe it was a little bit less expensive to find good talent, outside of New York and San Francisco, for instance. And so, InVision was great because we did have an option to go into a WeWork. We had one in Boston. And as you know, we started to, scatter them throughout the globe, but really there wasn't an expectation that you had to go in. And so we were still a remote company first from the top down. And, so we sort of built from there. And, again, just, people say, hell, you can't have a sales team remote. And this again is back before remote was the thing and remote was cool. Yeah. But why? Well, you can't hear, other people's calls. Well, that's coaching. And there's clearly, technology out there today to support the coaching, whether it's team building activities, all of these things you can address through remote. And ultimately, sales is tied to numbers. So that's kind of the ultimate measurement that, lends itself well to a distributed environment. Yeah.
I mean, certainly that's the argument I've made God knows how many times on this podcast and everywhere else that the future of work, it's all based on it's a simple math equation. Like you have a deliverable by a certain timeline, and if you've done it, you've been productive, right? There's no presence, there's no more 9 to 5, there's no more seeing you. Hey, get this done by that time, and in theory, what you do between now and then is really up to you. But to kind of grow off of your point of initially the idea was kind of building a team in Boston, but still hiring. We had people. I remember Ahad was, I think, in Texas. I think he was over in Texas. And certainly, as you grew the team, and especially later on, when you moved it internationally, the idea was growing, and you really, in theory, couldn't have the entire sales team in one place. And now, certainly at Qatalog, right, the entire team is remote. So, would love to hear the thought process, the procedural changes, like all the kind of different pieces. And let's know, I'm happy to nerd out and go to a deep dive here, kind of coming from that perspective of, okay, we initially have a core group of people in Boston, and like, what was that then process that moved away from there? Okay, now we're hiring people everywhere in the US, then globally, and away from the office. Again, like what kind of pieces were in there? Like, again, you probably had to have some new processes, new documentation, as we were speaking about. We'd love to hear kind of like what that whole thing looked like.
Yeah, definitely. And I think it was, it's important to set the foundation from the start, because as you start to scale, it gets a lot more unwieldy. And so,
absolutely,
we were very clear from the start that, we did have some people that, Ahad in Texas, and we had some folks in San Francisco. One, you had to set some of the behavioral norms, right? There couldn't be a have and a have nots. And those simple things, like if everybody's in a conference room in Boston, but there's a few people dialed in, everybody has to be on their own computer, and just even the playing field. And, I really, sort of built and developed this concept around, especially for sales, measuring, the behaviors, the activities, and ultimately the results. But no one was more important than the other. And so behaviors is, simple things like SLAs around, everybody being on their own computer, or, cameras on, during meetings, all of these little things, but also, values. Like I've always been a big, kind of culture person. And they say, especially with remote, they say culture is the hardest thing to build and maintain.
Absolutely.
We didn't have very vibrant values early on at InVision. And it was always one of those things that the can was getting kicked a little bit. And so, the enterprise team, we just built our own values, it was sort of a bottoms up. The team got together, we built the values. Ultimately, InVision, launched some, really compelling values that we adopted and aligned to, but making sure that people understood what the values were and that they were part of the fabric of the day to day. They weren't just, slapped onto a website or, recruiting pitches. It was, we had a Slack channel with the values. They were built into performance reviews. We held people accountable to them. We celebrated. We had values awards every month. Little tools like Bonusly, Bonusly, like
huge fan of those.
I should be on Bonusly's payroll, but
so should
but
I.
just there was that pattern, because you could hashtag a value. And so making sure that people were aligned to the behaviors, and then you also had the activities. And in sales, it was doing the right things, whether it was customer meetings, pipeline, or coaching conversations for managers. You had to define what those activities were. And so we built these leading indicators, and, honestly didn't roll them out very effectively at first, because everybody was like, I don't want to be micromanaged and policing everything I do. And I was like, all right, fine. We're going to boil it down to just customer meetings, because everything sort of comes from that. You're not going to have pipeline if you don't have customer meetings. Prospecting is obviously not effective if you don't have the customer meetings. And so we boiled it down to that. And so measuring those activities and doing it for, the reps and the customer success folks, but also doing it for the managers. I had the managers every quarter define for me what their leading indicators would be. I'm going to do 3 coaching calls a week. I'm going to do a career development conversation once a quarter with everyone, whatever, deal reviews twice a week, whatever it was. But those leading indicators, and then obviously you have the results. And in a remote world, sometimes you only measure the results, but that's not enough, because maybe people aren't doing the right thing. They're not acting the right way. And that's as important. And in sales, especially, because in sales, sometimes the results aren't there. Maybe it's timing, budget, competitors, whatever it is. But it's a very different conversation if somebody's acting the right way and doing all the right things and the results aren't there, versus somebody that the results are through the roof, but maybe they're being a jerk and, they're not meeting with customers, but they get a bluebird or something. And so making sure that you're looking at the world through the lens of those three things was definitely a game changer for the sales organization at InVision.
No, I love that. There are 2 points I'm going to pick at here. The first is
Sure.
I love the idea, and I totally agree with the early days in InVision. The culture really kind of happened within the team, and I've seen that consistently. I still see that today. Really, I mean, we were probably the third, fourth, fifth all remote company by then. These things didn't exist. The GitLabs didn't really exist yet with all the great documentation and things like that. So everybody came from an office environment where, again, very few companies historically have ever had good company culture. So you've taken this office mentality where even in that case, a lot of it was grassroots, right? Each team, they sit next to each other, they go to lunch together, they go for beers after work. So a lot of the culture happened by itself because the team were together and they had the opportunity to engage and do things there. So when you come to a remote world and then everything has to be intentional, if you didn't have the experience or the knowledge of, hey, I need to intentionally create these opportunities here, you'd kind of leave it up to the team or the individual teams that create a culture. And then it's, as you said, InVision kind of later down the road, kind of packaged everything together, took the best things that people are doing, and then kind of gave us a northern light. And I still consistently see that with many of the remote company, we'll call it the third bucket remote companies that I coach. The second piece that I would love to dive into is that idea of I'm a huge believer in context, right? As much people like to say data-driven. For me, data is a red flag at best, right? It's kind of here, I'll give you an orange flag here, but it kind of says, hey, look deeper here. No, this is not just the final answer. Take a deeper look. So I love that insight of, especially as we look towards the future work. And again, many of the focuses are going to be on output or contribution or things like that we always need to have in mind the context. So especially in sales, where it could, as you said, is simply close sales, or number of leads, number of the qualified meetings set up, number of deals closed. But in an environment like it is today, where companies are downsizing, companies are tightening their purse books, it's much harder to get those meetings. It's much harder to get those sales just because of the environment that we're in. So if you're just looking at, did you get this amount of qualified leads or did you close this amount of deals, you're not seeing the whole picture. And doing what you've done of kind of looking at it more holistic, and are you doing the right things? Are you going through the right actions? That's taking that into consideration versus just the end numbers. And I absolutely love that idea. And maybe if you have one or two examples to maybe share, it could be recently, it could be an InVision where you kind of saw these use cases where, for whatever reason, could be maybe a junior person or the economy at some point of time weren't where they were supposed to be, but you saw, because you put those procedures into place, that people were doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah. No, there's a lot to unpack there, but I think a couple things. I think one, it's sort of, it touches on the hiring profile because, for sales, you might think, I'm just going to go hire the Oracle salesperson that's just crushing their quota. I think that might not be the right person for a remote environment. Absolutely. And I think InVision did a really good job of hiring people with a good profile for remote. They've got a high EQ. They've got a lot of, empathy, resilience. They've demonstrated resilience in a past role. They're proactive. They're people that are going to come out and ask for help. Because sometimes in remote, you're like, I don't know the answer to this, and I don't want to, just slack somebody randomly or whatnot. They're motivated by self-development. They've got to have some, intrinsic motivation to better themselves. So I think hiring people helps you get people that are focused on things that are important beyond, just the results. So I think that's really, really important. And obviously that lends itself to the culture. Because again, I'll continue to go back to culture. InVision, for all the things that, maybe went sideways at times, to get to be an almost 900 person company, fully remote, and have culture be one of the best qualities, that was a big accomplishment for InVision. Absolutely. And it's too bad that's not celebrated more. Yeah. But if you ask anybody from InVision, maybe the story didn't have the happiest of endings all the time, but everyone will say culture was great, the people were great. And that's hard to do. And you look at simple things like context, again, to your point, I remember one of the CTOs at InVision, would write these blogs about the engineering updates. And those were great for, salespeople like myself, where you're like, what the heck's going on in engineering? And, like,
for sure,
at the time, you don't understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
But he would write these great blogs on a monthly basis that just, kind of dumbed it down a little bit, and just in, normal speak. Here's what we're working on. Here's what the updates are. Here are the issues that we're fixing. Here are our goals. And that was great. And a lot of that was context. And I think, again, context is everything. And I think the biggest thing for context in a remote world is, relative to change management.
Yeah.
Because changes happen in, companies all the time. And half the time people are like, wait, why did we make that change? What is it? And so the why is everything.
Yeah.
And you've got to double down on the why. What was the process that went into this? Hey, before we roll out this decision, we want to let you know we've been working on this for 3 months. These are all the people that were involved. These are the trade-offs that we prioritized. Go into that entire process and then hammer the why. This is why we're doing it. And because change management can, make or break a remote company. If you're rolling out changes, whether it's product changes, layoffs, whatever it is, you've really got to double down on providing the context around why that decision was made so people feel comfortable.
Absolutely.
That, the right thought process and people involved and decision-making criteria are all part of it.
Yeah, I totally agree. So moving forward a little bit here. So Qatalog is moving beyond just remote. And a lot of the content and the branding is very focused on helping lead companies and lead us to where the future of work is going, and that's async. Would love to hear a little bit more about Qatalog's async culture and how other companies can do the same and implement the same. Because again, for me, my 2 cents are, we say that going back to the office is like the worst thing, right? To return to the office, we don't want to work for those companies. Those companies are terrible. We want remote. In 18 months from now, synchronous meetings, synchronous communication will be the next iteration of that, right? That like the old game of remote will kind of be no one will talk about. And now it's the idea of we have to sit in meetings all day long. I don't want to work for a company that works like that. So I'd love to hear, again, your experience, Qatalog's experience, and then what other leaders can start thinking about doing within their own organizations to, again, move forward with the future of work.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And, a couple things there. I think that, the balance of power has shifted from employers to employees with this move to remote. There's obviously job opportunities out there for employees to work from anywhere. And so you really have to prioritize employee well-being. And so how do you do that? And one of the ways that you do that is, something that Qatalog is setting out to solve, which is making information accessible. It's so frustrating when you can't find something. And, Qatalog, we've done a couple really strong third-party research reports, one with Cornell University, one with GitLab. And
they're great.
One of the things we found is people spend right now on average 1 hour a day just trying to find information. Oh, was that in Slack? Was that in Salesforce? Is that a Google Doc? I don't know. And that leads to employee frustration, right? And employee engagement. And then if you find the data, is it accurate? Is there a level of trust that the data is the right data and it's up to date and it's accurate? And so that trust in information also, impacts employee engagement and employee satisfaction and well-being. So, one of the things that we're setting out to solve with Qatalog is, we've got enterprise search. One click, I can search for anything. I can search across my email, Slack, Salesforce, HubSpot, Notion, whatever, and I can find something at the drop of a hat. And that changes your mentality a little bit, because think how frustrating it is before a meeting when you can't find anything. And so that's been really important in terms of making sure that the information is accessible, up to date, and accurate, regardless of the tool. And so I think that's one thing that's really important. And, I think another thing with async, like remote, if you don't figure out async, you're done. You're dead. Like async is everything. Async is everything these days. And so I don't care what you use, but, even with one of our recent reports, it was like 30% of people didn't even know what async meant, and it probably means something different for every company, and that's okay.
Sure.
you have to clearly define it so everybody knows. And then you have to be overly prescriptive.
Yeah.
This is what we're going to do in terms of the tools. These are the tools we're using. This is what this one's for. This was one, this one for communication. Yep. These messages should go in Slack. These should go in email, whatever it is. But you should have that written down and documented. I mean, at Qatalog, we even documented, how we work. We came together on my team. We put together a document on how we work.
Yeah.
Who was on? When do we do one-on-ones? What do we do meetings for? Do we celebrate birthdays? Do we use nicknames? Like just putting it all down on paper. And so there's one central resource, which is enormously important for, new employees, because the biggest issue with remote, or one of the biggest issues I would argue, is onboarding new employees. It can be awfully lonely in a remote world. And so making sure that people know everything, not just, coaching them on the latest product, but how do they act? How do they communicate? How do they socially interact? Like all of those things need to be documented in an async way. And, for a sales, some things are easy. If it doesn't exist in Salesforce, it doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Done. You know what I mean? And so you kind of have to do that for the rest of the business. You have to take these pockets. And, I look at things like DevOps, and then in the InVision world, design ops. Design ops became incredibly important to design organizations to streamline processes, streamline communication, streamline tooling. That's basically what Qatalog is doing for the entire company.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love the point of, again, having to document everything. I interviewed somebody last week from HubSpot for the show and was fascinated by the idea of one of the things that they documented through the process of going remote before and during the pandemic, where called Gen Z, who were just first job out of college, and they didn't know, was it okay to use emojis in Slack when talking to their boss or their colleagues? Because maybe on SMS or whatever tools that's kind of run to the game. But now in a business environment, they didn't have that experience, especially again, being remote. They didn't just even going down that level. Hey, when you communicate, adding something in there, yes, emojis are okay in this scenario, maybe not so great in this scenario. And I couldn't agree more that everything is documentation.
Yeah, and being prescriptive, we hire a lot of folks that, maybe it's, they're more junior in their career. Even things as simple as time management. They don't know how to spend their day. And that's okay. And so again, with the onboarding, we would do 3-month onboarding, curriculums, just so people knew. We would do time management training, and then we would be very prescriptive. You should be spending 2 hours of your day on prospecting, whatever, on admin, and, spend an hour a day on self-development and learning, whatever it is.
That's awesome.
But again, people don't really know how to manage their time and don't expect them to. And so be prescriptive and help them manage their time, cut it up into chunks. But you're right. People need to know all the behavioral norms, which also gets tricky. I managed the international team and lived in London for 3 years for InVision. There's different behavioral norms, obviously, internationally. For sure. And so being very clear in terms of what those parameters are, how you call some things out that maybe, certain, regions or cultures aren't aligned with, and giving those guardrails for folks.
Yeah, something that you said earlier, and I've certainly experienced this in my latest role, and again other companies that I've worked with, is this mentality again maybe old school mentality that especially a sales team has to have lots of synchronous meetings, right? We're skipping the whole idea of whether the office and data sharing and high fives, but you're obviously moving away from that, obviously with Qatalog. But is this really true, right? The sales teams, they feed off each other's energy. They have to be getting on synchronous calls every day or team meetings. Because again, I've seen this so often. And again, and that's what I've heard from the sales leadership. It's sales teams have to be synchronous. We have to get together. We have to feed off each other's energy and this and that and the other. Or really, is async also the future of sales too? Outside of having a customer call when you have to have a customer call, but is async also the future of sales teams is for most every other team within the company.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I'd rather have my team spending time with customers than internally. And so they should be able to get the information that they need asynchronously. And the one thing is probably the coaching. But again, there's technologies out there, whether it's the Gone, the courses, a million of them out there that enable you to provide those coaching moments. And that's what's really important for async, and documentation around, where customers stand in their journey, what their friction points are, what their objections are, whatever that is. So sales should 100% be able to be async. And, we're remote. I mean, InVision, we went from, almost nothing to 100 million in ARR in 5 years, right? And so there's some proof points, the GitLabs of the world, like it works.
Sure.
And, there's going to be a time and a place for team meetings and things like that, and, doing role plays, all of that stuff. But for the most part, all of that, technology has come so far that there's opportunities to sort of address and support the organization asynchronously, even for sales teams. And I'd rather prioritize them spending times synchronously with their customers and the market and the community that they're involved in than it would be internally.
Yeah. So if it's okay with you, I want to do, let's nerd out here. Let's do a deep dive outside of the customer facing things. So we're saying asynchronous is the future of also sales, but how are you doing it now? And how are other sales leaders, can they recreate the knowledge sharing, the coaching opportunities, just celebrating wins, right? Again, in the office, somebody closes a big deal, high five. Okay. You do it in the office. How do you do that? And how do you recreate those moments? Because again, right, in a remote, everything's intentional. So you have to intentionally recreate every one of these coaching sessions and feedback, whatever it may be. So how can leaders be doing that in a remote async environment, again, outside of the customer facing stuff?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's always going to be those social moments for celebrating a deal or whatnot, but you have to make sure that those moments are captured in a way that somebody outside of the time zone that you're in can participate as well. And, selfishly, and, we use Qatalog for a lot of it because, again, it breaks down the barriers and the silos between the teams that allows you to have the documentation visible to everyone at the organization. It's not just like a closed one, notification that comes through Salesforce. We put something in Qatalog, it goes to everybody in the company. And then, maybe it, corresponds to the Slack channel, but making sure that you're creating those moments in an asynchronous way that everybody can access and respond to. Like, again, in an asynchronous world, you've got to make sure that everybody has a voice, and that voice can be documented. They can provide a comment on a particular thing, or, surveys, or there's all these engagement tools out there, that we used at InVision, but, people need to feel like they have a voice. And so you have, whatever the mechanism is, for us, it's Qatalog, but for whatever the mechanism is, people need to make sure that there's some way for them to provide feedback into the organization and, product direction, sales motion, whatever it is. All of those things. And then, just even at InVision, like there was all these little tips and tricks that we used to use that would sort of, one of the things that, this might be going off the topic a little bit, but, everyone's like, oh, you can't do remote because you can't brainstorm. Brainstorming needs to happen, and all of that stuff. And you see the explosion of digital whiteboards and all of that. They're great. There's a time and a place. But you remember Clark at InVision always had this term bad version, and it was sort of a safe word to throw things out. A bad version, I haven't thought this through. What if we tried boom? And it was one of those little safe words. And you could do that, putting it onto on a digital whiteboard on, InVision freehand or whatever. Bad version, here's this. But again, it spurs that proactivity around throwing out ideas versus people being like, I'm not sure I want to put this on a document because I'm not sure it's really the right answer. And so having all of these little tips and tricks, or, we always use for feedback. Feedback was another one. You're like, oh, in a remote world, you can't get the feedback. And so, we had this concept that we didn't invent, but the the deck of cards. I don't know if you heard the deck of cards where it was, the red are positive and the black are sort of constructive criticism, and hearts and clubs are kind of vague. Hearts, hey Scott, great podcast. All right. Yeah. Or hey Scott, I really didn't like that podcast. We focused on diamonds and spades. Diamonds is positive and specific. Scott, I really like the way that you structured the questions in that podcast. Spades, Scott, the one thing I think you could have done better was, ask this question up front, whatever. And so we would build that into the culture. And so then even in the document, the async documentation, you would have those diamonds and spades. And that, again, gave people stimulation to provide feedback. Because I would go into calls or if I would share a presentation, I'd be like, all right, everybody needs to share a 1 diamond and 1 spade on this presentation. And then you get these comments in there on diamonds and spades, and people knew how to frame it. And or if you're in a Zoom call, everybody all of a sudden, everybody's like multitasking, and then it's like, all right, we need to have a diamond and spade at the end of this presentation. Everybody like lean forward and lean in, and then again, you're spurring that culture of feedback, which some people think, oh, you can't really do that in a remote world, but you can. You just got to come up with your own sort of cultural philosophies and tips and tricks and all of these things that become part of the fabric of your organization, your culture.
Yep. That's very interesting. Kind of pivoting away from the internal processes from sales and how to async them, even the actual customer facing or customer engaging piece is also starting to go async outside of just, kind of cold emails. But something that we were doing at Cloud App, obviously dog fooding in the product, especially with SDRs, where again, you're trying to prospect, you're trying to get someone even on like an initial conversation, a 15-minute call, just to kind of give them an initial pitch. And a lot of times, like, people don't want to get on that call. People don't have the time to get on that 20-minute call. And you still, as a SDR, you want to give them information that will be valuable to them. So we were kind of dog fooding the process where we'd create an asynchronous video, 60 seconds, 90 seconds, 2 minutes, and share that video. So we had the opportunity to give them the information that we wanted them to have, to allow them to watch it and to consume it in the time that's convenient for them, and kind of check off those boxes. And we saw a decent engagement rate from that. So we'd love to hear, again, maybe things that your team was doing to even async part of like the customer facing process, and what other companies also should start thinking about, and what kind of big ideas is like video going to be a big part of this future, or any of those things you're thinking about or seeing?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, video, I feel like it's got a lot of positive momentum. I don't know. I get these video outreach from SDRs all the time. I don't watch many of them. You want these short clips, but what we do like a Qatalog, we'll create a Slack channel with our customers, and so then they can immediately provide feedback. Or one of the biggest things that we built into the product with Qatalog is like, we've got this ecosystem where you can share knowledge and communication. We've opened that up. And so, a lot of our clients and customers right now are agencies, and they want to be able to develop these, workflows or these projects, but share them with their clients. And so we've opened it up. So now you can share externally all of those parts of the product that help you communicate and collaborate within Qatalog with your customers. So there's an asynchronous, documentation of, project updates or work streams. All of this stuff has been opened up. So I think it's, using the tool stack that you have and, sharing that with your customers as well. And maybe that's a little bit less relevant for prospects, but who knows? Maybe that's the direction things are going as well. And I think videos, there's probably a place. There's probably a place for videos. I still think like content, if you want to call it async, sharing thought leadership and content is still going to be the primary mechanism to drive awareness of whatever it is that you're doing versus cold email outreach. Because I just think cold email outreach right now is just not as successful as giving something of value to people in an asynchronous way.
Absolutely. And it's been so much, I mean, I still look at tons of these. It's the spray and pray, right? No research, no things. You just kind of send it to like 1,000 people. Hopefully some people convert. Like the one idea we had been thinking about with video is especially getting away. We understand from marketing, from sales, that personalization has a huge impact on engagement, opens, replies to this content. So there is no tool yet that I found that can add in a macro. So if I create an asynchronous video and I say, hey, Ryan from Qatalog, right? There's no way for me to macro that in there. I had to take the time to personalize this video, right? And you can easily tell if something's like cut and chopped, where you just kind of take the whole bit and point and then kind of just add in some like intro. So if you don't do that and you just take the time to personalize a 90-second video, but I put in, hey, Ryan, and put your company name in there, at least potentially gives the feeling to the potential leader, whoever's receiving it, like, hey, Scott actually took the time to record this video just for me and personalize it just for me. And that's something, again, that we've been championing at Cloud. I've been, it would be interesting to see kind of what that impact is, moving forward.
Yeah, it's just everyone's personalizing these days. Hey, Ryan, saw you went to Boston College. Hey, you do this. All right, great. Again, I think the way that you get someone's attention in this noisy world is adding value. And whether it's content or video of something, but it's got to add value. And that's what, the personalization needs to be. It's less about the school you went to, the company you are, that you raised money or whatever. It's more about personalization of the message that's going to add value to that person. And so that's where I think the direction of sort of the sales outreach is going. And it takes time, but that's what's going to get bounces.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I remember I did lots of workshops in different areas. One was writing these types of mails. And I remember getting one in InVision. This was probably about 2015, 2016 or so. It was a tool that we used back in probably 2012, 2013 that we haven't been using. And they did the right process of, here's the issue that you're potentially having in this type of role, and here are the companies. And it was funny to say, like, hey, we would love to tell you how companies like Microsoft, whoever, and InVision have been using this product. And I thought to myself, all right, two things. Number one, we haven't used your product in like 4 years. But number two, it's like, you're going to tell an employee of InVision how we use the product at InVision. So it's like, again, just like these spray and pray. Even when you're trying to do it the right way and personalize it. I completely agree.
Unless someone in InVision was using it. Because I remember back in the day, we used one of those spider whatever technologies to see all the SaaS tools we were using. There was like a few hundred SaaS tools being used, because at a 900 or 800 person remote company, it quickly gets very unwieldy. And I think that's another important point for people is you've got to distill down your tool stack for people and then enable them, because in InVision we had so many different tools that maybe somebody was using. I mean, even now, like in the Qatalog world, like we talk to people and it's like, this department's using Asana, this one's using Monday, this one's using ClickUp. They're all project management tools. It's like, what are you doing? But they don't know. They don't know. And so you've got to be prescriptive again and sort of distilling down that tools, but then showing people how to use them, who should be using it, when they should be using it, and what they should be using it for. But I do agree on your personalization, on your personalization point.
Yeah. So last question I have for you is, obviously besides Qatalog, what asynchronous tools are you using, you and your team? And similar, like what tools would you recommend, obviously Qatalog included, for sales teams to start looking at, to start implementing, to start asyncing their processes? Yeah,
that's a good question. I mean, like I said before, I'm a big fan of Bonusly, and that's something that explicitly addresses that culture point. Gives you those micro celebrations. Hey, Scott, great job on this podcast. Here's $2. Like you lose those high fives in a remote world. I think that's really important. I think tools like Scratchpad, or there's a few of them out there for sales where, what do salespeople complain about? It's such a pain in the butt to input information into Salesforce. Well, there's tools out there like Scratchpad that make it easy to just import notes into Salesforce. And then, again, selfishly, Qatalog is a game changer for us in the fact that the sales team doesn't have to go down a rabbit hole to figure out what the latest is on the product roadmap or, where we are on this marketing strategy. It's all one click away, and so it's very easy. Or, we have an org chart. Most org charts are fairly static and, not up to date or whatnot. Our org chart shows you in real time what everybody's working on. I could click on your profile right now and I could see all your projects. I could see all your goals, where you stand against those goals. I could see all your latest activity. And so I know very quickly, like, hey, who's working on what team are they on, and where do those things stand? And so that's really important for a salesperson that maybe needs to get something quickly for a urgent client, question or situation.
Is that an internal tool? The map and all the other information that's what they're working on, things like that?
It's part of the Qatalog product. So all of our customers
that's awesome. That's
and
amazing.
it has a directory sync. So whatever you're using for your org tool, you can just import it into Qatalog, and all of a sudden you have an org chart that shows what everybody's working on. And so it's really good. And, there's some social context to it as well. I want to search and find all the people at the company that are into, rock climbing. Yeah. And in a remote world, sometimes it's hard to figure out who those people are. But in our company directory, you can hashtag and put all of these different things in there, and it makes it very easy for remote employees to find folks and have a little bit of social context. This person lives there. These are their interests. This is what they did last weekend, whatever it is. And again, it adds to the culture and employee engagement, which is ultimately the biggest thing in today's environment.
Yeah, 100%. So for listeners listening that want to learn more about you, want to get in touch with you, same thing with Qatalog, want to learn more about Qatalog, want to connect with Qatalog, what's the best way to get connected with you and get connected with Qatalog?
Yeah, you can email me, Ryan at Qatalog. I'm happy to take a call with anybody at any time. Give you a little demo of how our customers are using it.
Awesome.
You can find me on LinkedIn, at Ryan S. Burke on Twitter as well, and then Qatalog.com.
Amazing. So we'll definitely
Qatalog
all
with
those.
A Q. Let me clarify. Qatalog with a Q.
For sure. We'll definitely put all the links in the show notes. And Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. Yeah. It's something I've definitely wanted to do, and I hope to do more this season of kind of doing deep dives within specific teams within an organization, because the last couple of seasons been kind of like a very overview kind of company top down, and want to do a deep dive more on specific teams. And I think the best place was obviously in the sales team, which historically has always been kind of synchronous. Office space, let's everyone get in the same space and be synchronous so we can do the high fives and all of that. Yep. But you and Qatalog are kind of leading that change, moving obviously remote, of course, but moving even more towards asynchronous and leading the charge to show other sales teams globally that, hey, we can be doing this, you can be successful at it, and kind of leading the path. So certainly appreciate all the knowledge and wisdom that you shared. And to everyone listening, until the next episode, have a great day.
Awesome. Thanks, Scott. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for tuning into today's show. I really hope you enjoyed it. My aim is for everyone listening to have one takeaway from each episode they can then go and use with their teams. If you enjoyed the show, please feel free to support me by subscribing in your favorite podcasting app, on our YouTube channel, share it with friends and colleagues, and please feel free to buy me a coffee via the show's website.